our amazing guest actually to celebrate a very special day. So back in 2016, the UN General Assembly declared that the 18th of June should become the World Day of Sustainable Gastronomy. And this is a very important topic for us at the Future Food Institute because we strongly believe that there's a deep connection between us as eaters, our production system, but also the health of humanity and the health of our planet. And so for this reason, to celebrate this day, we started this morning with a kind of a marathon, because we started in Japan with our partners that were hosting experts talking about this issue also from the Asian perspective. Then we were talking with FAO because we were launching the learning platform of FAO with incredible speakers and experts from all around the world. And now we jump into our, say, global platform that is involving experts, writers, people from the industries, professors. And we wanted to invite here 3 friends of the Future Food Institute that actually are sharing with us many of, our missions. So today, together with me, we're going to have Sophie Egan, a friend coming from the Google Food Lab. She is a well-renowned writer and expert in the food sector. And she's also sharing with me, the journey with the Food for Climate League initiative started by Eve through a poll and an amazing group of people and ladies working inside the food industry. Then we're going to have Dondeena Bradley. She's the Global Vice President for Nutrition and Wellbeing from Barilla Group. And Barilla is one of the partners supporting our educational program really since day one. Being part of our journeys, our mission, we have been really doing amazing things during the years. And actually, we are sharing very interesting, activities involving students all over the world. And last but not least, there's my friend and sometimes partner in crime, Professor Peter Klosse from the Netherlands, the founder of the Taste Research Institute, that actually is also the partner that is developing with us the series of the Food and Climate Shapers Bootcamp that we are running together with FAO and also the Google Food Lab as a big supporter of this program. So I want to start a conversation actually inviting here, let's say on the virtual stage with me, Sophie Egan. So Sophie, please light up your camera. And I would love you to start to talk about this topic, because actually you have been publishing really a few months ago a very interesting book that actually I have here with me that is How to Be a Conscious Eater. And I think that this book is full of insight, very easy to understand. And I think it's pretty interesting to start from that because all of us, we are eating multiple times a day. And each time we gather around the table, we need to think about what we eat because we are honoring our past, we are experiencing our present, and we can get ready for the future. So thank you, Sophie, to be with us today.
Thank you so much, Sara and the Future Food Institute for the invitation to speak with you today. I'm excited to share conscious eating, what it is and why it matters. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you joining wherever you are. Thank you for taking the time to hear my perspective. I thought it might be helpful to briefly share a little bit of background about the point of view that I bring. So I am an author. I started a consulting practice called Full Table Solutions that's really aimed at being a catalyst for food systems transformation. It is so completely aligned with the values and the vision that Sara mentioned. That's why I'm certainly excited to be part of the Food for Climate League as well. And through my work, I really aim to work with bold leaders across both public and private sectors, and even better, through public and private partnerships to accelerate solutions at the intersection of food, health, and climate. I'm also a New York Times health contributor. And for the past 5.5 years, I worked at the Culinary Institute of America. So I led health and sustainability initiatives there to really transform the food service industry. And one of those initiatives was called Menus of Change. And that experience actually led me to see one of the most powerful levers for change in the food system, which is institutional purchasing. And this is really the ability to significantly affect supply chains upstream, everything from antibiotic-free meat and increasing the biodiversity, whole grains, produce, and so forth, as well as sustainable packaging and the like. So this really led me to work with a wide variety of institutions, from hospital food service to K-12. But I've also really become particularly drawn to college and university and students, young people, the future food leaders. And so I have the chance, in addition to working with Food for Climate League and other partners through my consulting work, to continue to serve as the co-director now of an initiative called the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative. And it's actually fun to be on this panel with both Dondeena and Peter, who Barilla is a founding sponsor of that organization, and Peter is a researcher, part of that network. And there's so much tremendous opportunity we see to really affect that profound identity formation that occurs during adulthood and early parts of one's life around expressing your values through food. And that really relates to conscious eating. So the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative really uses campus dining halls as living laboratories for behavior change. So with all of that background in mind, I am also an author. And I wrote this book, How to Be a Conscious Eater, because I've seen how much confusion there is, how much anxiety there is about what to eat. So what is conscious eating? To me, I suggest that it is the lifelong intention to align your food choices with your values. As Sara said, we have this incredible opportunity and also really responsibility 3 times a day, if we're lucky. And when I say conscious eating, to me, that is really this kind of a 3-part mental checklist, a compass, if you will, for your lifelong decision-making about what to eat. And I suggest that you ask yourself the questions of, is it good for you? Is it good for others? And is it good for the planet? To me, good for you is nutritious, absolutely, but also safe, wholesome. Does it do the body good? And also good for the whole you, emotionally, psychologically, and how it relates to heritage and familial traditions that also bring you joy and comfort. Good for others. This is about all the people and animals across our food systems and leaving the best possible mark on all of them, from the growing, raising, producing, to harvesting, processing, transporting, and preparing, serving, disposing of every item we come in contact with. And then third, is it good for the planet? So we'll talk a lot about this, of course, with the term sustainability. But for me, this is not only in kind of doing the least damage, but in possibly even restoring ecosystems that are affected by food production. So this could be the long-term vitality of wildlife habitats, rivers, lakes, forests, fisheries, plains, prairies, the ocean, air quality, so carbon footprint, water footprint, and really minimal burden on arable land. And it's really comes down to traceability and transparency. There's a cliche, of course, of know your farmer, know your food, or know where your food comes from. But it's more than that too. It's how is your food produced, not just by whom, but in what ways, what agricultural methods. So I offer this framework as a way to essentially think holistically, not to say every single time you put something in your mouth, it checks all 3 boxes, but it would be nearly impossible to do that and would probably drive yourself insane. But it is worth asking, I think, does this food I'm about to eat, a product on a grocery shelf, a menu item, does it at least check one of the boxes? If not, is it really worth your budget, especially now amid ever more serious economic constraints, thinking about how you allocate your grocery dollars? So part of the need for this book, in my opinion, based on a lot of the work that I've done, is that we're often very tribal as eaters, adopting this or that diet regimen. This is understandable, right? We're maybe seeking control or community with others within that tribe. But these silos, we can create tunnel vision. You might be on a vegan diet, so focused on animal welfare that you're not realizing the harm maybe that highly processed plant-based foods or substitutes are doing to your own welfare. Maybe you're so focused on keeping out sugary and highly processed foods, you're super healthy, doing great for your own body, that you're not realizing the water footprint of those foods. Or maybe you're not realizing if you're really focused on weight maintenance and you're eating individually sized, kind of pre-packaged, portion controlled foods, maybe that's having a lot of packaging waste. So it's trying to just think more holistically as much as possible. So the book is organized into these 4 parts, starting with stuff that comes from the ground. And it really, I think kind of taking a step back about food culture and heritage and all of the kind of values that are baked into this. My first book was called Devoured, and this really looked at American food culture, why we eat, what and why and how we eat in the United States, at least. And it looked at particularly values of work, freedom, and progress, and kind of for better or for worse, how they shape our eating habits. In this second book, How to Be a Conscious Eater, it's more about what values should drive eating habits. And those are personal, community, and planetary health. So especially here in the US, I'm based in, soon to be based in Colorado. I've been in the San Francisco Bay Area for a long time. An amazing statistic came across my attention, which was that 8 in 10 Americans are confused about what to eat. And that makes a majority of them doubt their food choices. This is such a bummer. There's so much, not only information overload and confusion, but actively misinformation and disinformation. And a lot of it is not evidence-based. So food should nourish us, body and soul, so many of the great notes that Sara shared. So I really want to ensure that that eaters are empowered to make food choices they can feel good about. So this book goes through kind of 60 bottom line answers to the most top of mind questions about what to eat, and really also emphasizes that each of us has this incredible impact through our purchasing power. We can be individual, household level climate heroes. And if you're a parent, you have even a multiplier effect across the thousands of meals your child can eat throughout their lifetimes. And so seeing the power of that. And what spans there are many themes throughout the book, in addition to these individual sort of specific topics, all 60 of them throughout the 4 sections. One of the main themes is that, as a shorthand, kind of a take-home message, foods that are from the ground, plant-based foods, tend to be best for both people and for planet. Doesn't mean you have to go on a full vegan diet, but in terms of emphasis in the diet. Because sustainable eating is also the eating pattern that you can sustain. In terms of your impact on the planet, it's better to be flexitarian or plant-rich or plant-centric, however you want to call it, plant-forward, than be vegan for just a year. So there's a lot of nuance in the book, and really trying to both simplify, but also in some ways make more complicated the set of factors on your radar. One of the things I really love, I mentioned to Dondeena, I'll just briefly share, is the Barilla food pyramid, which shows why, what are the foods at the bottom there, the foods that are suggested consumption being the highest, with the least environmental imprint. It tends to be those that come from the ground. So it's not good or bad, black or white, all or nothing. But in terms of proportionality and in terms of really where the bulk of your eating pattern is comes from. And I really appreciate that Barilla and a number of other food companies, but it can be hard to know which ones, really are rooted in evidence. And they're rooted in these values of food choices that benefit, that are right at that intersection of human and environmental health. So with this framework, adding that third dimension, if you think of a kind of a camera, an aperture that is added, is really that others lens. So I think of the people and animals, as I mentioned, all across the food chain. But I want to mention that in time of coronavirus, this others dimension is ever more important if we think about just how essential the hands that feed us, all of the workers throughout the food chain, from farmers, ranchers, meat processors, delivery workers, retail workers, truly essential individuals that make it possible for us to enjoy, to even have this luxury of abundance from which to choose, to have information and labels and so forth, to be even discerning what's going to be a conscious choice or not. So I suggest that essentially the book can be sort of the prescription lenses to see straight amid that decision fatigue. And with that, I wanted to leave you with just 3 kind of takeaway messages from the book that relate to why not only conscious eating matters, but sort of how you might think about it going forward in your life. One is, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. It can be very overwhelming if you think about this, this lifetime. If you think about, trying to be sort of perfect with each and every choice, but really this is more of a mental checklist, a decision-making framework for the long haul. And really you have to realize too that as time goes by, new factors will come out of darkness and into the light that we'll have to contend with. So it's more of a mindset and a tool, a framework that enables you to make this constant commitment to yourself to raise your awareness of new issues as an eater. The second kind of major takeaway I would offer is conscious eating is, and sustainable eating can sometimes be seen as, only for the elite or something like that, or only sort of when we can get around to it. But taking care of yourself, others, and the planet through food is only more relevant during and post-pandemic. In many ways, this incredibly unsettling and bizarre time has been a gift of a pause button, the chance to completely reset. In behavioral science, we see that times of disruption like this can actually be incredibly positive opportunities to rework household systems, or what you eat for breakfast, and everything. You may be examining products more closely than you were before. So I could call this Corona conscious eating, which is to say it's not a frivolous side project that we can get around to worrying about sustainability, after we're all safe. It's not either or, but it's really the crux of daily life. And it's wonderful to see some new trends emerge around, paying more attention to perhaps immune system, eating produce because you can be healthy now, not only preventing disease in the long term. But the pandemic has also laid bare the fragility of our food systems. And I think you've probably heard this elsewhere, many cracks in our systems. And in reality, normal was a crisis. Business as usual has not been working for many, many people. And it's definitely not working for Mother Earth. So the good news is we have practice now. I think we're starting to get practice as a global community, more equipped at working together in collective action in the name of climate action. And so with that, I'll leave you with one last thought, which is that to be a conscious eater is to begin with your own habits, your own household, but also to look more broadly to affect change on a systems level. So I mentioned institutional purchasing at the beginning because it is my hope, and I leave folks with this idea at the end of the book, that you can also raise your voice in helping to shift the practices that companies that you buy from and institutions that perhaps feed your children, or in elder care settings or college and university settings, or in your employer, to ensure that they are also providing food that's good for us, other than the planet. Because at their scale, that purchasing power has ever more impact. So we also want to raise your voice in terms of policy. So vote with your grocery basket, vote with your forks, yes, but also vote with your votes. It really is critically essential for that systems level transformation. So marrying individual action with structural changes is really what conscious eating is going to be, big picture. And I suggest that essentially there's room for each of us to respond to this higher calling for gastronomic citizenship. And that might be a way to think about what this is and how interconnected we truly are as a global community. And my sincere hope is that cultural change, systems level change will happen to the extent that my work becomes completely obsolete, that we won't need a book about conscious eating because it won't even be called conscious eating. It will just be called eating. So I hope these are some useful pieces of food for thought. And Sara, I turn it back to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sophie. You have been touching very interesting points, I would say. And before jumping into the second topic, I want to just thank all the people, eaters, innovators, youth that are following us on social media, because we are live now on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. And I want to invite you to share questions. There are already some interesting questions raising from, say, the audience. Please send us the question, because we really would love to open the conversation afterwards. So actually, picking what you were saying, Sophie, I want to touch some of the points, because you have been talking also about the importance of diplomacy, politics, and I would say probably the things that we are seeing now are, say, highlighting the needs of creating a new kind of leadership. The world needs a different kind of leadership, and all, let's say, the terrible things we see happening everywhere in the world are actually the same, the same kind of size of the violence that we see. What we see that people are doing against the environment is the same thing that we see people are doing against, say, other friends, other people. The violence that we see in the cities, I think, is the expressions really of a need of different care and different attention to the broader ecosystem. And for sure, how we connect with food and the food choices and education as well are all elements that affects our level of well-being, and I think that is all connected. During the last years, actually, we spent days an endless conversation talking about how we are going to feed 10 billion people, talking how might we tackle SDGs. And I think that the 17th of the SDGs actually is probably the most important one, because it's really highlighting the need we have to combine efforts and to join efforts and to bring partnership and highlight the importance of partnerships. So now I want to give the space to Dondeena Bradley. She's the Global VP of Nutrition and Wellbeing at Barilla Group. And of course, she represents a big brand. I think that this is an incredible time in history. Really, actually, we see that also from the trust barometer, there is a need to trust also brands. I think it's really an incredible opportunity for industries that are really working in the good direction to start to share knowledge and to engage consumer, work with the consumer, and really try to build a better future working together. So I think that Barilla has been always inspiring us from different perspectives. And I think it's pretty interesting also to have the voice of the industry in our conversation. But also, Dondeena have been publishing also a book before Christmas. She published a book that is talking about living the full circle. And we have not been talking about the importance of circular living and the circular lifestyle yet, but for sure, it's strictly connected with all the other things that we have been mentioning until now. So I leave the stage to you, Dondeena, because I think that there are many interesting dots that we can connect now.
Absolutely. And thank you for inviting me into this conversation. Sophie certainly had some jumping off points as well. I would just start with my personal and professional interest in kind of creating practical approaches that people can adopt in order to live well. And so here we're celebrating this day where, you know, the art of food meets the, let's say, art of inspiring behavior change. And it's like game on, like how can we actually contextualize how that can happen for people? And, you know, when you think about when I entered in the late 80s, early 90s in the food industry after my PhD, that was the beginning of the food label in the US, right? So the National Labeling Education Act came forward. And so here I'm sitting 3 decades later and, you know, we're asking people to eat more plants, go durable, reduce food waste, go circular, show up in kind of any way possible. And I think too, you mentioned the pyramid and what a great work that, you know, the Barilla Center for Food Nutrition has done in looking at tools and ways to kind of help people think differently about their choice and its effect on the environment and for themselves. And so to your point about trusted partner, I think the more that we make that easier for people and Barilla as a trusted partner, I think the more impact and the ripple effect that we can have on people on the planet. I kind of have 2 jumping off points before we open it up to the panel. I think words matter, right? Language matters. And this word sustainability, when you look at the data and how people interpret it, people tend to underestimate kind of the environmental impact of their own kind of eating habits. And so although there's some awareness of what that means, they only really think of sustainable as a synonym for environmentally friendly. And, as I'm kind of thinking about the role of well-being, for me, the science of well-being has really exploded around mindset. And Sophie, you alluded to this. It's interesting, right? So living a healthier lifestyle, and healthy lifestyle being kind of a phrase that's embedded in public policy and how do we think about people and how they eat. When you think about that, that's really been focused systemically on behavior change, right? Eat less, move more. And the results of that, I would say most are really unhappy with the level of impact that we've been able to have on chronic disease and such. And so when I think about the science of well-being and how that's entered in, and you start to think about mindset, so mindset is kind of in that notion of being mindfully present, and then that behavior change is the doing, and then with respect to kind of the action or the impact that we want to have, we're able to say that and walk the talk. And so I think we're at this point where we're really starting to understand the level of stress on our ability to actually shift our mindset in the context of something that's sustainable. So if we're coming at it from this place of fear and stress, it's kind of an emotive response. And some will say that's not very sustainable. And in fact, if you look at the science, it's actually amplifying your stress and cortisol. And some have gone far to say, from an expert perspective in COVID, that if our chronic illnesses, or if we're overweight and we're in this chronic state of inflammation, and now we're under even more extraordinary stress and that fear, we have just continued to push the button on cortisol levels. We're not really able to kind of ground and live as well as we really need to and want to. And so I think my kind of hope and the infusion that we're trying to bring through this context of a sustainable supply chain, right, from field to fork, is how do we bring well-being, that art of mindset, through love and inspiration and all of the characteristics and attributes that I certainly love about Barilla. How do we infuse that kind of in that value chain so that we truly are looking at the behavior change from a sensibility of inspiration as opposed to kind of fear. And the other thing I would just say is the narrowness of well-being in some cultures, right? We've almost reduced it to a checklist. I need to eat like this. I need to go work out, and in so much of a regimented way. And in this time of COVID in particular, we have to be more agile, and the ability to kind of pivot in a sense of kind of feeling safe and being able to do that with just awareness of its impact on us. And we're all in confined places. So the traditional lifestyle advice just seems so trite. And so my hope is, when you look at the Italian concept of benessere, I'm sure my Italian colleagues can pronounce that better. I mean, that literally means to be well, right? Or well-being. So it's love and good food and conversation and community. And for me, that's the deep value of Mediterranean diet. That's the deep value of sometimes what we forget in terms of the lifestyle around kind of slowing down. And anyway, it's just kind of enabled me to make this distinction of even how I think about rituals, and some of those rituals in the book that I did author, of wellness and well-being. And so while wellness is maybe making you feel your best, I think well-being, in a sense, is increasing your capacity, right? We all have this innate capacity to thrive, no matter what circumstance. And so I'm keenly aware that I think we're building capacity in real time. And for me, that's about hope, right? That's about ways to think about bringing others along in such an extraordinary, unprecedented time. So I'll pause there, but I couldn't be more thrilled to be a part of this, and just to think about the impact that we can have by bringing more inspirational, actionable kind of approaches to how we live life every day.
Thank you so much. Actually, my feeling sometimes is that in the past years, we have been all been working a lot in silos. So industry just working with business people, policymaker with policymakers, and there were not enough connection and, let's say, cooperation and collaboration. I think that now is really an interesting time in which I see that this is happening. And I think that to reach the goal, yeah, it's well-being, but within well-being there is also inclusion, there is health, there is education, there are all the the other 16 SDGs before the partnership one. So I think that this is absolutely the main goal that we need to reach. So before opening the conversation, I want to invite Peter, because I think that after those two inspiring talks, actually, there are many things that Peter can cook, I think. So Peter actually is a great friend. We met thanks to the Google Food Lab, because we entered in the same day, probably. And from that day, actually, we started our journey. Our journey, because actually Peter has been joining Future Food in all the programs, the global missions, and the summer school that we started since 2015 until now. So Peter actually is the founder of TASTE, that is the Academy for Scientific Taste Evaluation. But around that, actually, he has been developing a full concept that is not just linked to what we are eating, but how people are connected to the environment and health and well-being and prosperity created around. So I would love Peter to share your approach and start to connect the dots before we open the conversation, and we invite also our fellows and youth in the conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. And of course, you did well to connect us, the three of us, because indeed, Sophie hit it off well by stressing that we need to be conscious eaters. I really like her word on gastronomic citizenship. I love that phrase. And indeed, it is possible by eating differently and by making different choices that we can improve and restore many things. So restore people, restore health, restore our planet, restore the environment. So restoration and a restaurant have everything to do with it. So I keep on feeling more and more close to the idea that that restoration is a very gastronomic theme, and I'm very happy that this day exists, because gastronomy, for me, for a long time always said that gastronomy connects the dots. So I'm very glad for bringing us together. And as Dondeena said, one of the biggest problems that we have in connecting these dots is that most people have made this science of well-being into, let's say, a checklist and to a right and wrong. And I believe that's very contrary to our culture, but also very contrary to what we like, very contrary to seduction and making good choices. So I really believe that it would truly help to make better choices, indeed. But what fails up to now often is that we are not talking about seduction. We're not talking about helping people making these other choices. So what I would like to bring to the table, metaphorically, is my cat approach. And I'm not talking about the animal, the cat, but I'm talking about the abbreviation of convenient, affordable, and tasty. Because I think that that could really help the discussion. So if we think back on last year when the Eat Lancet reported that we should eat more vegetables, and that eating especially CAFO meat from the meat industry has a very negative impact on the environment, and that vegetarian, more meats, more fruits, less meats, but more fruits and vegetables would really be a good choice. Then the thing that lacks in the discussion, I'm always amazed to have to say that, is we should talk about people. We should talk about making different choices and helping people to make these choices. And I believe that we should be very aware that most people that make the choices that well, of course, in your panel, we don't make. But these people like that, what they do. The foods that they currently buy are convenient, they are affordable, and they are really tasty. So we have a huge competitor. So we say to people, hey guys, rethink your food, rethink what you do, rethink your choices. Then we are up to telling them, buy different foods. And I think it should really be helpful, and we should include in that discussion that these other foods, the better foods, are just as convenient, just as affordable, and just as tasty as the ones that we're asking to give up. So that's CAT. And the CAT formula, I would really be a part. Of course, I'm a gastronomer from birth, so I was born in a restaurant, so I feel very, very happy in this gastronomic environment. And I really believe that gastronomy, the culinary role, the role of culinarians, the people that understand taste, is a little bit the missing link in the whole discussion. So getting culinarians on the table, getting people on the table, so not just chefs. I mean, Sophie is welcome as well. So the good writers, the ones that understand taste, the ones that can connect these dots, the ones that can make the thing work. Those people, they can be a true, let's say, a part of change, and change agents are what we need. Of course, we also need to get rid of a lot of obstacles. We need to find places that we can empower to make the change, but understanding the role of taste, understanding the role of nutrients and nutritious foods, and foods that are really good, foods that can restore, is, I believe, what we should be focused on. And a little bit different than Sophie, we call that take culinary responsibility. You know, everybody talks about corporate social responsibility, and of course that is a part of the story. But if we would take culinary responsibility, then we would also shift the focus a bit from what Dondeena was saying. It shouldn't be just about sustainability and environment. It should be about making different choices that ultimately are better choices because they are better for the planet and better for the people. So health in this broad holistic concept. So that would be my start of the discussion. And of course, you will take it on now, Sara, to make make the conversation even more interesting.
Thank you so much, Peter. Anyway, always very, very interesting, your way of connecting dots and bringing us around the table, talking about taste and much more. So now here in the audience, we have Julia, Liz, Elizabeth, and many of our fellows, former students, now ambassadors. They are going to be with us during the digital bootcamp. So I invite them to raise your hand and tell us if you have question. But before that, I want to just touch the point of the concept of the diet and the dietary restriction, because there's something that is going to be one of the central topic during our bootcamp. That is the topic of the Mediterranean diet. And if you think about the Mediterranean diet is not a diet, it's a lifestyle. And actually the origin of the world of the diet is not related to that. It's not related to restriction or to medicine. It's really an holistic topic of way of living. And so I think that this is an interesting perspective, because then from that we can start to build also a new concept of thinking really about food as a medicine. Of course, the old philosophers were saying that, but this is also something very true, and is not only related to the food we are eating, but how we're growing food, the quality of the soil of our food, the quality of the air that we breathe and our food is breathing as well. So I think that there are a lot of interesting thoughts that we can also bring as an inspiration from the ancient, say, philosophers and the ancient tradition, I would say. So I don't know if Julia, if you are connected, if you wanna jump on screen because Julie, actually, she is the director of our bootcamp. So I would love her to join us if she wants. Oh no, she said, Francesco just said that she couldn't connect. But so I would love maybe to ask you a first question, and then we can start a conversation like that. How do you think we can nudge this move to a different approach to food at a larger scale? Because of course we are talking about that since years, and we are doing that. We are, say, role models probably in what we are saying and what we are doing, but this is not still something exponential. This is not something that is reaching everyone. So how do you think we can really expand this concept and make it real, make it for all? I know that it is a big question, but I know also that it's going to be one of the biggest challenges that we're going to face, because in the next months, we know that we're going to have millions and millions of unemployed people. And of course, the pockets are going to be probably one of the drivers of choice in front of the shelves of the supermarket. But also, we need to push people to make the right choice for the health and for the health of the environment. So how do you think we can start from that?
Well, I could kick it off. Oh, go ahead.
Well, no. Well, it's quite all right. I would just start off by saying one sentence, and the one sentence is: we should start small, because everything starts small, and we should empower, let's say, the places where change easily can happen, because that gives you the narrative, gives you the story.
And I'll just build on that. Not only should we start small, but we should really start with new tools that actually bring these opportunities kind of front and center for people to actually act on. And the best example I can give for you is just, it's a personal internal Barilla example. But for many years, the company had put the CMEB Sranio concept in our cafeterias and canteens. And we watched that when it was designed in, people made different choices, and the team actually measured a lot of the impact that had. And it was pretty impressive without even telling them that was the byproduct of the choice. And so kind of my short sentence is, if we can bring, I think of cookbooks as kind of collectible items, but now with digital and cook-alongs and really bringing the chef closer into the kitchen, we're actually helping people and teaching people how to eat. And it's small shifts and they're enjoying it. So I think we need more actionable tools that are affordable and accessible for people in ways that we haven't even imagined.
The power of the teaching kitchen. We know that.
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe to build on both of those, I mean, it's interesting because I work partly as a writer. So that means I aim to disseminate information. And yet I firmly believe that information does not change behavior. For alone, that is. Education alone does not change behavior. And so it is a piece of the puzzle, but I think some of the frustrations you mentioned, Dondeena, is in putting the onus entirely on individuals instead of changing the actual environment. That environment is a policy environment, incentives. Can you afford to eat in the ways that I'm suggesting, that Peter's suggesting? The physical environment, the food choice, the set of choices that are available to you in the first place, so that you can make the choices that are best for you and others in the plan. If those choices, if you are a salmon swimming upstream, so to speak, in order to make those choices, that's too much of a burden to be placed on individuals. So that's really what I was trying to indicate around policy, but also the role of business to increase, let's say, the percentage of products available, so that it's not like, oh, how do I kind of on the grocery shelf find the one thing that might not totally blow my blood sugar, and the rest of them are out to dupe me. But what if most of them were really great options? And then it's just therefore so much easier, not to mention if they are affordable and tasty. I love cat. I have kind of a caveat in the beginning of my book that really indicates the parts that Peter touched on, which is that if the foods don't taste not only as good, but preferably even better than the alternatives, then there's going to be no reason for folks to choose them. If you cannot access or afford foods that are good for you others than the planet, it doesn't matter how sustainable or how healthy they are, because you won't be eating them. So it's, where do we start? I love some of the examples that, or the example that you shared, Dondeena, from your experience, and I'll toss in two from my own experience. So one is with the Food for Climate League that Sara and great leaders at Future Food Institute are engaged in, which is recognizing that a lot of folks have been left out of sustainable eating because it's not meeting fundamental human needs. It's too aspirational. It's a nice to have, not essential. So bridging that gap is what the Food for Climate League is really aiming to do, and understanding how climate beneficial eating can deliver on daily essential needs, not just be sort of for the, in the US, it'd be the Whole Foods market or the, you know, the fancy foods types of eaters. The other work that I'm involved with, the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative. This is a partnership of the Culinary Institute of America and Stanford, network of 60 colleges and universities. Through campus dining halls as living laboratories, we have a research agenda that's aiming to answer these very questions, Sara, of how do we shift to plant-forward diets? How do we get folks to waste less food, not just individuals, but in the back of the house, right? This is not all on eaters, not all on policymakers. It takes the whole system working in concert. And so what's been really interesting is to find one concrete example of a study that we did called the DISH study, the largest study ever conducted in dining halls in the United States. And it found that using taste-focused labels on the very same vegetable dishes that emphasize attributes of how it was cooked, ingredients, source, herbs and spices, dramatically increased the number of people who chose that vegetable. Exact same vegetable. And in this context, price was not a variable. So we need to acknowledge that caveat. This is in a dining hall setting where it's all you care to eat. You've already paid at the outset. But it shows you that, to Peter's point, just ensuring that the mindset that healthy in the US, healthy is often equated with bland. And so helping folks overcome that. But also the other key finding of that study was that the food actually had to be super tasty. The vegetables had to actually taste really good. And that sounds obvious, but it's not. Because
not
if you're
anymore, it used to be.
Yes.
Sophie, words are just as an ingredient as the real ingredient. So it should be a great product to start with, because of course, in our food system, we have eliminated taste in the idea that we could reinstall taste later, either by all these food additives or salt or fat. And so we've had this crazy idea that nature shouldn't give us taste, but that we could do it later. So it needs to be very good to start with, but the element that you bring in is very important as well. Words are ingredients. So as soon as you say this is a healthy, sustainable salad and it's very good for you and it gives you a vibe or it gives you energy, then the big chance is that many people pass it and say, well, maybe that's a salad for tomorrow, but now I want something tasty. So the crazy thing is that the same salad, if you call that, we have two Italians here. So you say it's going to be an original Tuscan salad, then immediately people say, oh, wow, an original Tuscan salad, I really like that. So the only naming things with words that are appealing really helps making the good choice. So we should, that's also a part of holistic. It's not seeing food as just what's on the plate and therefore we should eat it. It's also how it's named, how it's framed, how it's the portion sizes, how it's on a plate, everything counts. So we really should also take this broader view on attract people to make these choices.
Mm-hmm.
I think that pleasure, but also the social value of food, the social role of food, how we share it, when we cook it, and so on, are all values that needs to be linked to the food we are eating. So
well,
maybe
the importance of culture, of course. That's one of the, let's say, hidden secrets of the Mediterranean diet. That it's not, like you said, it's not just a diet. It is not even a diet. It's a way of receiving food and handling food and preparing food and taking time for food. It is again much more holistic, much broader, and directly, very important, directly linked to season and to what's available around you. And that's also a very important part of the bigger story.
Definitely. So now actually we have connected Elizabeth from India. Elizabeth, I invite you to turn on your camera if you want. So Elizabeth, she was a student of the Food Innovation Program. She did the world tour with us, the global mission. She knows really well Peter. And she also founded Edible Issues, that is actually a magazine in India. And she founded that with another of our former students, Anusha. And actually they are doing an amazing work really to sharing knowledge around the future of food all over India and now Asia at large. So considering that Elizabeth is also involved in our digital bootcamp, leading the chapter in India, I would love her maybe to share some thought about that.
Thank you so much, Sara. I'm sorry, I would have to keep my video off because I'm having a bit of an internet connection issue. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you, Peter, Dondeena, and Sophie for those really great thoughts. Sophie, I love the idea of food choice and food citizenship because Edible Issues, as Sara said, was given this amazing platform and inspiration at the Food Innovation Program based around the idea of food citizenship to kind of understand the system here in India so we can make responsible choices as eaters and participants in the system. And now I think with the coronavirus and all of these and how the system is a little is upset by this, we're seeing especially here how there is a large section of society who can't really, who has a very small chance of making a choice. So I used to be a cook. I mean, I cooked, I'm a professional chef and I cooked for a long time before I joined the Food Innovation Program. And so I think at the Innovation Program, my thought was, what is my value as a cook before and after the kitchen, and how can the choices I make, not just inside the kitchen, but outside of the kitchen by buying, and what happens after food, what is my value to the system? And I think that especially now during this time, I feel like we're given the opportunity to revalue our roles in gastronomy to kind of help that trickle off into helping other people who don't really have the choice or make a better food choice, I think, in some ways. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing. This was really interesting thought. Yeah.
Well, Elizabeth, thank you. I would love to just kind of acknowledge a little bit what you just said, which is that to this question Sara asked of, how does this change happen? What I often look at is what are levers in the system or in systems. I mentioned, college years, a young person's identity formation, clearly children in terms of teaching kitchens and food literacy, the work that you described, Dondeena, about tools, but also chefs are huge influencers of culture. And so really when we think about, okay, not only who's going to make the food tasty through the ingredients, who can then work with the people, maybe marketing or others who work on the words as those, I love that idea of them also being ingredients, but also just in using your platform as a chef, because of the social influence that we have seen, especially among young people, but really more broadly all around the world. And so I'm really excited when I see things like the Chef's Manifesto tied into SDGs, and work with Eat Forum, but also just to hear you, Elizabeth. And I think more and more chefs have really embraced that role. And so long as they're doing it in an evidence-based manner, I could not more fully support using that platform for that change. I see Dondeena nodding too.
Well, I'd build on that. I mean, you can appreciate in this time of COVID the number of restaurants that have to shutter and really reimagine how they want to bring their art and just skills forward. And I would just put a challenge to that end of, if you think about the number of unemployed chefs who are talk about art and science and how they really understand how to make food palatable. I wish we didn't have to say this is tasty and this is healthy, because that's been my life. If we talk about the healthfulness of it, for whatever reason, it kind of reduces its taste credentials. Maybe there's a new way that we can think about these skills and this art and push it forward in ways that we haven't even imagined. I think it's a critical time for that.
Yeah.
Great.
And I have also Liz from South Africa. Liz, would you love to jump if you want with a camera, if you prefer without, but really would love to hear also your voice.
I'm on.
Yeah, ciao. It's good to see your face.
Thanks. It's good to see everybody, and thanks for the very interesting introductions. So I have kind of two questions that I've been thinking about, and it's also following up on, I think, which is kind of a post-COVID food world and how we would reimagine that. And just following up on Peter's, what he said about cat is, where do we really find the gap, and do we really still include the mindful eating part, as Dondeena also mentioned, within that spectrum? Because I think if you try to define where the gap is within the cat system with the post-COVID food world, how do I define it, and where do I see my own gap is, I don't know if it's convenience, affordability, it's definitely not taste. But what has come to forth from any of you that you think is important, that you see a need for consumers, albeit convenience, affordability, or taste, or is it more something that's about the I think the conviviality of eating together, which I think for me has been lacking, even though I still have all of my other three aspects.
No, I think you're very right to include the social aspects, Lisa. Would be a sad life if we would eat all by ourselves separately in different rooms, or in a new quarantine period. Of course, one of the big joys of eating is, of course, eating together and having fun together. And one of the big things, at least I realized, was one of the first days that we gathered again with our research group. It was the first day since months that we've seen each other. And this is only that, being together again, there is something special about the social aspect, and certainly around the table. So I'm here with you, but they are at the table, so I'm a bit, let's say, getting hungry, thinking of, I want to be there, but I also want to be with you. But that shows already that the conviviality of food and being at the table. The table is the metaphor of everything. That's where the conversation starts. That's where peace starts. That's where we everything. Well, only silly people quarrel at the table. So let's say it's the best place to be ultimately.
As the kitchen is the best room of the house.
Yeah. True.
Yeah, it's the room where grandmas tell you the stories. It's really, I think, really something connected to the energy, the fire, and the family, the soul. So thank you so much, Liz, for bringing the voice from South Africa. And now I would love to fly to Brazil. Actually, we had India, South Africa, now Brazil, all countries that are sharing this sense of joy, I would say. And I would love to ask if Evie, you want to turn off your camera. And so Evie, she was with us in 2 different boot camps last summer. So we were sharing 2 different experiences. One in Japan, where actually the major topic was, rethinking the role of agriculture, both in a hyper-urbanized center like Tokyo, but also in the rural areas. So we were talking about climate smart farms. And then she decided to fly also to Iceland. And she was sharing with us also the boot camp focus on climate smart oceans. So working with those resilient communities up in the West Fjords. So that's been an amazing experience for all of us. And now she's leading the chapter for our digital bootcamp in Brazil, and she started an amazing project over there. So, Evie.
Hi, all. Thank you for having me. Sara, ciao. Nice to see you again. Thank you, Sophie, Peter, and Dondeena for such an amazing conversation from bringing these topics to the table. And as we see here, it's all about perception, it's all about culture. And growing up in a rural area here in Brazil, I saw that, like, working with different income people, like from the highest to the lowest, and the middle class as well. Like the conversation, it's all about perception, and that includes food as well. Because I was just having a talk the other day with a friend of mine, and she works with low-income community people here in Brazil, and she works with non-conventional edible plants. And how just the wording, like Dondeena was mentioning, wording like gastronomy relates to higher income, and then this creates a block, you know, instead of creating a bridge in the conversation. And how using, like here, Peter was using culinary responsibility, Sophie was using gastronomy citizenship, and how this, it's interesting, and how in the conscious level, the archetypes and everything, and how it connects with parts of our psyche that just turn on like blockages instead of bridges for us to get the conversation going in between different social levels, let's put like that, because that is one of the things that I'm realizing that I was always fond of understanding, and how we can bridge the gap of like this food in every level of the society, mainly through the low income people, because it's the biggest number of people in the world. So this population has to be addressed, because otherwise, like, we are not going to get much further, right? So it's just like how you guys see that initiatives that could work better for these populations, and how to bridge the gaps instead of building walls.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, or Evie, if I call you that, Ivan. I mean, I think this is of critical importance, and I don't think anyone has it figured out, is the honest answer. I think we are all on this conversation in our different worlds, working on different pieces of this gigantic puzzle. In many ways, we're interconnected. We have global supply chains, and we have elements of food culture that are spread all around the world. We have influencers through other, television and Instagram and YouTube and all sorts of things. But in many other ways, I think that my kind of takeaway comment would be not necessarily to what Dondeena said before of starting small, but at least starting in different regions, because there's such different barriers and such different cultural elements and such different policy infrastructure. There's not, I don't think, a one size fits all approach. But the good news, I think, is that the more that there are shared frameworks for learning from one another, so that we're not all sort of reinventing the wheel, so to speak, through things like SDGs or C40 or collaboratives and coalitions and alliances, then at least you can sort of test what's worked in another place. So it's not that I say, oh, do this or don't do that. But mainly my takeaway is that it's really going to be a highly regionalized approach, much as in a post-COVID world, likely more of the supply chain will become more regionalized. And so those two elements may go hand in hand. It'll be interesting to see if it's even a more participatory type of food system, which in turn can be a much healthier and more equitable and more sustainable food culture, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can't help but imagine just how quickly we shifted, right, in terms of problem solving when COVID hit, how to light the fire under that shift relative to being able to think about assisted food programs. I know it's different in every region, but as I've seen extraordinary stories of how food banks are partnering with chefs and looking at food waste and bringing people together in parking lots that are unused, malls that are unused, you would think that we have all of the systemic pieces, right, and the ecosystem. But to your point, how do we start to really think about consortium approaches to bringing those cross-functional teams together? We've done it almost every decade with some bigger problem. I think this is the time. I just saw here in the US just how quickly we shifted to online food-assisted programs. But I also appreciate literacy rates, people with lack of computers. And so how do we start to really kind of break that down and look at it in a way that we can build it back from scratch in a way that actually has a bigger impact? So I'm with you on that. And I feel like that's something I know personally I'm looking into, so I have a better understanding of how we can help and advance that.
Maybe just to add something that was not mentioned also, but it's a bit contrary to what I said, start small, but I believe that our governments should take a role as well, should take their role, because they have, of course, a big role in everything that we talked about. For instance, subsidizing the wrong foods and penalizing the right foods, or not investing in education. So there's so much of that either local governments or the bigger ones or the institutionalized governments could do, that shifting focus to the transformation that is needed, and then empower that transformation is certainly something that could enormously help. But then, of course, I look at American people and Brazilian people with presidents that don't really feel like doing that. So these are things, of course, and that is too bad that we have these, well, elected people that have an influence and have use their power in a way that is not really beneficial. But even in Europe, where we do have, let's say, other types of governments, even the European Union subsidizes the big food industry, and then in Holland the taxes on vegetables went up from 6 to 9%, so that's 50% rise of taxes. And then at the same time they're subsidizing big industry and starches. So that doesn't make sense. So wake up, people. You have a role and you can do something. So that's also just something else that should be on the table.
No, but you're talking about how, I mean, even in Italy, in the intake of fruit and vegetables is down 20%, right at a time where, you know, it should be more available. So I agree with you. We need to get the vectors going in the same direction.
Yeah, and I mean, I think to the point about government, I mentioned policy and voting with your vote as much as voting with your fork, but it's also, it's not just on, as I said, not just the onus on eaters, but and part of why I think it's going to be likely very regionalized is a bit what Peter said. I mean, depending where you live, in the US, we see the very state that you live in affects how safe you're going to be in this COVID time. And it absolutely affects, what your federal food assistance programs are. And so it seems like a lot, obviously, to swallow all of that at once. But I think it is essential that, I mean, the transformation that we're talking about, business can play a huge role, collective action of engaged citizens can play a role, but it cannot happen without some public sector change because it's too big. I mean, to the agriculture point, just in the US, a very sobering statistic that I'll share is building on the produce consumption. Not only has produce consumption been flat in the US, but if Americans actually ate the recommended number of servings of fruits and vegetables each day, there would not be enough because of the way that the incentives are currently, or subsidized are currently structured to commodity crops. Specialty crops are the term for fruits and vegetables. That doesn't make any sense either. So there's a lot of work to be done on the policy front, federal, local, regional, and otherwise.
Yes, thank you so much. Actually, I think that we have been touching so many points. We should vote with our vote. We should vote with our fork. I think that government plays a crucial role. And this is also the reason why we are always trying to connect all the different stakeholders, starting from kids, youth, teachers in the schools, entrepreneurs, innovators, scientists. we need that. We need that. So when I'm talking about breaking the silos, really, this is what we are trying to do also within our bootcamp. That is really a unique experiment of intergenerational way of learning, because we have been always learning with our similar people, and we never thought that we can learn from a younger person, or that we can listen. We need to listen more to our, say, grandmother, grandfathers, and they can share knowledge. So I think that we need to learn and to bring diversity also in our learning experience more and more. So I want to thank you all, and I want to invite all the audience that was participating so much through the different social media, also to keep the conversation open, because all of us, all the four of us, are around the Future Food ecosystem and are going to be connected in the next month with all the programs and the Food for Climate League and the Google Food Lab and so on. So I really invite you all to stay connected, to tweet and to tag all our, let's say, social media handles, because we really love to share and build this conversation together. And I want to just pick one of the questions that has been shared on social media, on Facebook, actually, from Paulina, that was actually sharing her thoughts, saying that was super interesting, the conversation, and she believed that is actually the big challenge. So we all want healthier food, but food is also indulgent, and we want to enjoy the experience of eating. If this is not taken into account when designing healthier food choices, they will not be preferred. And so for sure, food needs to be joyful, tasty, pleasurable. We need to be, say, connected with it as much as we can. And starting from cooking and starting from sharing, the fact that we're cooking together is for sure one of the first steps that we can take. And so I invite you all to connect with futurefood.academy, with our digital bootcamp, our bootcamp that we are going to host together also with Barilla, Google, and FAO in Polica in September. There's going to be many more masterclass and conversation from now until the end of the summer. This was the first one, and I have to thank you, because it's been amazing to start this journey with all of you, talking about sustainable gastronomy. That is for sure one of the topics that we like the most. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And
thank you so much for the invitation.
I hope to share a dinner with you soon around the table and to share a meal, because this is how we like really to create connection. We did that many times in the past, but now I think the thing that we need the most is really to reconnect also physically and sharing meals and really enjoy food together. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Look
Sara.
forward to that.